Okay, so before I get into the gritty part of my talk, raise your hand if you have a dog in your house. All right, keep your hands raised. Look around. Now, if I had asked how many people had lost a family member before turning 20, you would have seen about the same number of hands. 1 in 6 families have a dog in the home, and 1 in 7 people will lose a family member before the age of 20. Think about that. That means 1 in 7 people are grieving. But what is grief? The dictionary defines it as emotional suffering caused by or by bereavement. But saying that grief is emotional suffering is not entirely true. Yes, grief can be extremely painful, but it's more than that. Grief can affect a person's emotions, but also their physical state and personality. It affects someone's entire life. Smells, sounds, objects can suddenly make a person feel extreme happiness or pain. Or at least that's what it did for me. On February 18th, 2015, my mother died during my 7th period, 6th grade English class. I was only 12, and 5 years later, I'm still grieving. But let's start with debunking a common myth about grief. There's no timeline. There's no step-by-step process that's suddenly going to end grief. Grief is carried with a person forever. The 5 stages of grief that were popularized by Elizabeth Kubler-Ross is only one example of one way to grieve. For me, my grieving experience started with sadness and blame, and then after that came depression-like symptoms, and after that, I went back to sadness. Sometimes, even today, I still feel upset. But because many people believed that there was a timeline for grief, they expected me to get over it, because it happened a long time ago. As time went on, if I brought up memories of my mother, or just that I had missed her, they would tell me I was being kind of depressing, and they would ask me to stop talking about it. And although they did not mean to, it belittled my pain. It made me feel as though my grief was unworthy, and I was making a big deal out of nothing. It was hard for me, but I accepted it nonetheless. I began to bottle up my emotions and feel less and less. I became numb to my own pain. From freshman to sophomore year in high school, I changed friend groups and began to open back up again. Although at times they did feel uncomfortable, they let me talk when I needed to and helped me process still many of my unprocessed emotions. They never once made me feel as though my grief was something unworthy. They listened to me or just sat with me, and never once brought up their own pain, but most of all, never belittled mine. In early April of the same year my mother died, my friend Chloe lost her mother as well. Another one of my friends, Taylor, lost her mother as a toddler, and my friend Sam lost his father when he was no older than a child. All 4 of us had different experiences grieving, and different things that bothered us. Sam didn't like it when people told stories of his father, while Chloe and I loved to tell stories of our mother. And Taylor would often listen and reminisce about memories of her mother. But how should we know what's okay and what's not? I'm here to help you guys communicate with grieving people. Each person will have their own so-called triggers that can set them off. It can be hard to know what they are. Sometimes they're able to voice it, other times they're not. If they're not able to voice it, it's never a bad idea to ask. Certain things can make a person feel nostalgia. Smells, sounds, objects, foods can cause a person to feel pain or happiness. For me, it was this book, The Mysterious Manic Society, a book that I read 3 times with my mother. The first time, she read it to me. The second time, I would read a chapter, and then she would read a chapter. And the third and final time, I read it to her in the hospital bed of the downstairs bedroom. Now, since the day she died, I haven't been able to read a single page. I haven't been able to read a single page not because it's a bad book, but because it pains me so much not to be able to read it without her by my side. My family and I also received many gifts after her death. We received cookies and flowers, fruit baskets, cards. The sheer amount of gifts was overwhelming, and each one felt less and less personal. Although I never minded the chocolate-covered strawberries. Yes, it can be nice to have some of those things, but here's something that my Girl Scout troop did for me that meant any of those sweets ever could. My Girl Scout troop each gave me a little something: a rose, a wallet, a scrapbook, a piece of my favorite candy, and they did it in a way that made me feel so loved. I chose to continue to surround myself with people with the same caring hearts as my Girl Scout troop. They're what I called my support system. They helped me through my pain, but they didn't stop it. Now, can anybody guess what the most common phrase I hear when I tell someone my mother's passed? Go ahead, guess.
I'm sorry.
You guys guessed I'm sorry, which is right. Now, when someone says I'm sorry, it's an apology for something that they did that's their fault. But whose fault is it when someone dies? Why do we apologize for something we took no part in? It's one of those things that can, but doesn't always, make a grieving person feel frustrated. It makes them feel frustrated because they don't understand why you're apologizing. Always think before you say something. Phrases like, "At least she lived as long as she did," or "I could never go through this," or "They're with God now. They're in a better place. They'll always live on in your heart," can also feel the same way. For me, it didn't help when they told me my mother was in a better place, because I wanted her alive and standing next to me. But one of the things that I heard a lot, and didn't make me upset, but instead extremely angry, was when people told me, "I know how you feel," or "I went through this too." Here's the truth. You don't. You don't know how we feel. You can't know how another person feels. You'll never be able to. When people said stuff like this, it made me feel as though my grief wasn't important, and that they wanted to talk about their problems. After my friend Chloe's mother died, I sat her and her little sister down at her mother's funeral, and I told them, "I don't know what you're going through, but let me know if there's anything else I can do to help." I'm telling you this to show you that our grieving experiences were different. Even my own sister and I had different experiences. Communicating with a grieving person can be really hard, but here are my tips for you. 1, listen to them. Don't bring up your own pain. Let them talk as much as they need to, or don't. 2, don't belittle their pain, or make it seem that it is better than it is. It sucks to lose someone. Don't make them feel as if the way they are grieving is wrong, or that they shouldn't feel a certain way. And 3, always think before you speak. If you don't know what to say, tell them that. Because each grieving experience is different, this is only one example of what can work. Communicating with people is really hard. So sometimes, when you don't know what to say, you have to ask. So ask. Thank you.